Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation. This is your host, Salah Elleithy. I am honored and delighted to have Marsha with me today. Marsha is a leadership coach, a team coach, and facilitator. And I am really looking forward to this conversation. Marsha, welcome.
Thank you, Salah. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, we've been trying to set this up for a while, so I'm glad we made it work.
Same.
So yeah, I am hoping that we can have this dialogue or conversation to leave some takeaways for whoever's going to listen to it, and give them something to think about, maybe an action that they've been putting on hold for a while, and that has been kind of like the theme of this podcast. But I want to start by just learning a little bit more about you. I know a lot about you, because we've worked together in the past, and I don't know if you remember. Actually, the first time we met was I was in the agile team facilitation that you
I remember
facilitated with Ahmed.
I know it was a long time ago. It was one of the very first few courses. So you were part of this what I'm becoming to call this like special cohort of people that came through some of those early classes. That I think just about anybody in that class nowadays is out kind of forging their own path in this world, and especially in agile around facilitation. So it's fantastic. Everybody's going.
Yeah, facilitation, that was one of the milestones for me as far as looking at how facilitation can make a lot of progress for teams and individuals. And so I actually recently learned about publishing your book on facilitation and the art of facilitation.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's it'll be out hopefully in August, probably late August this year. So, yep.
Yeah. So what brought you to this kind of work, like coaching, facilitation?
Well, I came to facilitation actually really early on in my career. I was probably not even a year out of college, and I found myself with a software engineering degree and primarily acting as kind of a business systems analyst, bridging the gap between end users and development teams. So I often was in the process of collecting requirements, and I worked for a boss at the time who was really an avid reader and was always encouraging us to go get books and read. And I picked up this book. I would go to the bookstore and, look through the shelves, and I picked up this book called Joint Application Development. And it was really my first introduction into the concept of facilitation. And I read that book and then started looking for courses that I could take, and ended up in a 5-day class learning facilitation. And that was, I tend to be kind of just in time. So it was take that class, and then a week later, I was in the room with 30, I was working with the Department of Defense at the time, and we were collecting requirements across all 5 services at that time. And Coast Guard was part of DoD. And 35 people, just me, trying to collect requirements for a system that we were building. And so 1 week training, next week in the room, putting it into practice. But that was really my first introduction into facilitation, and it changed everything. It resonated so much with me, almost even more so than the software development side of things. But I found like this idea of getting voices into the room and hearing what different people had to say and wanting to have their input and trying to bridge the gap between, how we collected requirements. So that was kind of my first introduction, and it became, over the years, it began to filter into how I thought about leading and how I ran my personal life, and so it bled into lots of different phases. It was great.
Yeah, I like what you said first about there was someone who encouraged you about like learning and reading, and that's usually, I have a similar situation, like a manager who used to create this sort of like learning space for people, and he would recommend a book for everyone to read every month. That's usually good start.
Yeah.
And then the just in time learning, which is another thing, because a lot of people people think that they have to like cram everything and then they start like, they have all these collecting all this information and with easy access, everyone wants to learn, but then they don't really practice, right? So that's another takeaway here that I'm hearing from your story.
Yeah, I really resonate with the idea around practice. I think even certainly in the space of facilitation and in coaching, and I know you and I both went through Coaches Training Institute as part of our coach learning process. But one of the things I appreciated even about that process was a little bit of learning and a little bit of practice, and a little bit of learning, a little bit of practice. And I think there's a lot to that arc when we're talking about these skills, onboarding things like facilitation and coaching as part of your leadership stance and how you lead others and engage with others. There's some parts of it that just can't be trained. Like you've got to find a way to take it on and embed it and practice it. And I think that's certainly a kind of a core to my model and how I think about not just learning, but how we even how we structure our programs at TeamCatapult.
Yeah. It's, a lot of time and that's my approach is like, it's hard to know or to get clear on something without taking a step forward, without practicing, without doing something, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, we went through coactive, and coactive talks about like the being and doing, and even in the agile space, we talk about the being and doing. But then sometimes people focus too much on one side of the spectrum. So what do you say, like, where do you find the balance?
That's a great question. I think for me, I have to always be paying attention to when I can get out of balance with that. So good indicators for me and the being and doing is when I get overly focused on driving towards something, and it can become a habit. Like I'm just headed in a direction and I'm about action and taking more action, and just sometimes forgetting to connect or check in with, so why am I doing what I'm doing, and what's the purpose, and what if I just stopped for a moment and just checked in and stopped the action part of it. So I work with a coach as well, and that's a lot of times where we spend our conversations. I can find myself sometimes more on the doing side.
Yeah, it is. It's easy. I know I get pulled into that as well. Like it's easy with everything that's happening, and a lot of learning and a lot of areas where you want to learn more to just get into that constant learning, and it becomes exhausting, right? Just when you find that you're out of balance, what do you do then? Like what's the is there some sort of a practice or?
Well, it depends on when I recognize that I'm out of balance. So sometimes I think it shows up for me in a way of like, it just feels like I'm having an off day, or if I notice myself becoming cranky with things. One of my practices sometimes is to just put stuff away or stop, and sometimes just go somewhere and close my eyes, or sometimes it's to full on meditate, or sometimes it's just to take a nap, or sometimes it's just to put things away and go to bed and wake up the next day. I'm a morning person, so for me there's a lot that happens between going to sleep and getting up new and fresh in the morning. And then ideally have a practice of doing some type of journaling, and then listening. There's a couple of things that I listen to, and then doing meditation for somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. And I find that if I start my day that way, the day just is so different than on the occasions where I kind of get out of the practice, where I schedule things to start earlier in the morning. So I push that off so I can spend time with my family first and then get to work. The days that I miss that morning routine, I can feel it, like it shows up later.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm the same way. I just try to notice like what's happening, especially when I get a little impatient, I find that, okay, this is because I've been like just in that mode of doing stuff, and it doesn't really have, it doesn't connect to why I'm doing this, right?
Yeah.
And then I realize, okay, do I really have to do this? Like, what's the goal here? But yeah, I think you're bringing up an excellent point around like, okay, I didn't mean for this conversation to go this way as far as like awareness, but it's, we as coaches, we usually are in that space of bringing awareness to what's going on. And sometimes starting with ourselves, that can be, modeling that for whoever we're working with, and bring awareness to what's happening is the first step to really change anything, right? Yeah. Or at least that's what I experienced. So So what came up for me as far as like, I remember, I think I might have heard this from Lisa Atkins, this idea of coaching, or that you're holding a mirror to
Yeah.
someone else. But at some point, there's also what I'm thinking. Okay, so you need to turn that mirror to yourself every once in a while, right? And so, what's when you see the situation where there's some sort of stuckness, right? And you talked a little bit about facilitation earlier and bringing voice to the people in the meeting or in the space. It's almost like similar to coaching, where there's some point there's something stuck and you're trying to kind of like get that going. How do you notice when something is stuck, like, or when the team is stuck, or when a person is stuck as you work with them?
Yeah, it's great. I think that because of the practice model that I use in my coaching, both individual and with teams, and therefore it just by nature makes its way into my facilitation. For me, stuckness is a lot of times, like, some of the indicators of it are that you start to hear some of the same conversation, or the energy kind of drains out of the room. You can feel it. You'll start to notice it in body language, where people will begin to, in different ways, like some will disengage, some may engage even more, or it can become that, like, the heat can raise in the conversation and it can become more high stakes. So I think that all of those, there's lots of indicators about what's happening. And for me, like, when I start to notice something getting stuck in a conversation or getting stuck in the system, I think there's a lot to do around looking at behavior and how the conversation is unfolding. And so there's pieces of that I will be able to see just through a lens of and a language that I use. But one of the things that I'm always working towards with a team or a facilitation or coaching a team is helping the team see it. So the notion of a mirror, I love the metaphor of a mirror, because sometimes it's about asking people to look in or just name what's happening. And then at some point, there's something about, like, holding up a mirror for the team that almost puts too much power into the space of a coach. And I'm actually wanting the team to begin to own it more. Like, I think one thing to be able to name something that's happening, or be able to name the structure of what's happening in a conversation, so that people can see it, or just notice, what feels like the air just got let out of the room. So there's, I think there's ways in coaching, but I'm also wanting team to grow the muscle of being able to do that themselves.
Yeah. It's, I think that's one of the things that this might connect with what you were saying earlier about, like, self-awareness. And when you start to notice what's happening for you, it's almost like, we're trained for the most part as coaches to kind of notice what's going on and pay attention. And that's really when I stop noticing what's happening to me, then that's when I feel like, okay, there's something is out of balance here. But yeah, the tense in the room or in the space, because sometimes you're not in the room, you're like online now, or on the phone. You can hear it, you can feel that the air just got sucked out of the room, and no one is saying anything. So you're bringing to mind for me a couple of things about just the notion and I look at it as the gifts of coaching. It's certainly the gifts that coaching brought me, is just this heightened sense of ability to listen at different levels and in different ways, and to notice when I'm, listening in one way, and when I can shift my attention and focus and become more aware about how I'm listening and actually intentionally listen differently. And then I also think about the ability to zoom back out and see and notice what's happening. You asked about how I came to facilitation and coaching, and I came to facilitation early on. I came to coaching much later, and I often describe it like I was technically trained. That's where I spent my time in school. And so I got into the workforce, and I'd say I worked for some good leaders, but as time went along the way, none that I would really say, I'm not sure I learned by watching others kind of leadership, or the leadership that I wanted to be. And so I went off to my very first coach training. It was just this one-day workshop that was done locally. And I went there because there were things that I recognized about my own leadership where I was stuck and I needed to do something different. And I was really at a loss as to what that was or what it would be. But I had, like, something drew me into coaching, and I thought, I hear a lot about this.
I'm not sure what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but I've got leadership challenges and I wonder if that would I wonder if it would help. And it was that course that then led me to work with a coach for a while. And then I ended up, heading off to CTI. And even when I went to CTI, I went there because I wanted new leadership skills. I had no intention of becoming a coach. But, long story short, I did. And what I'm so grateful for is my leadership would look so different without coaching on board. And I am grateful every single day for, I have a different kind of lens in which I can look at separating myself from other and listening much more actively and intently and focusing my questions to be about the other person and looking to inquire and understand. So I feel like I've got so much more range. So anyways, that's a little bit of how I came to coaching. I had no intention of becoming a coach.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that definitely resonates with me as well, because when I went to the coactive coaching, starting the very first course, I was just looking to improve my coaching skills as an agile coach. And I felt like I know you call these Groundhog Day conversations, right?
Yep.
It's like I felt like I was having that same conversation with everyone, like the team or individuals or managers. And I started to think, okay, maybe I need to work on myself. I mean, I not just like someone else that needs to change. I need to figure out what are the skills that I need to improve in. And so, coaching was definitely something that I started, and I didn't really decide that I was going to go through the whole thing. I just wanted to explore the first session, and then after I did the first coaching session, I just I couldn't stop. I just kept going. And
I love that. Can I interrupt you for a second? Because I love
sure.
this question that more of a statement that you just posed about like noticing the Groundhog Day conversations, and then the curiosity around what part am I playing in it? I think that is such a life-changing question for me, because I can look back earlier in my career and see lots of ways that I would tell the story about how things were happening in a much more blaming, like they're the problem, I'm the victim story that I would tell. So anyways, I just love the perspective.
Yeah, and you talk about like this leadership in like dialogue in leadership, and I really believe that coaching skills are really core for leadership, because like you mentioned earlier, like this idea of listening, right? Listening at different levels. That by itself can be just a place to start, like to see what's happening. Like most of the time we're listening at level 1, which is like listening to what I'm thinking about and what I'm feeling. And we're not really paying attention to what's happening outside of that. So it's listening is an underrated skill.
Yeah, I agree with you. We need more of it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is one of your favorite coaching conversation? Is there some sort of a like something that comes to mind when you think about having these coaching conversations or dialogue, whether leaders or teams?
I think in general, it probably the ones, and well, it's funny that you asked that question, because of like the first thing that comes to mind for me is what I just pointed to, when you said, this is happening, and I got curious about like what my role or part would be. If I think about some of the conversations that I've had in coaching that gave me a lot of energy, and they gave me a lot of energy because what I noticed was my client showed up in a really curious, willing place to actually go deeper and look at some of that work. Like those are the conversations. There's a couple that I can think about where, and just at a really high level, one particular executive that I was working with was just really balancing this conundrum that the person was in around making some decisions that would change the nature or the direction of the organization, and feeling like they'd had a lot of feedback and stuff about that and not sure what would work. And so it created high stakes for this person. And so anyways, in the conversation, we spent a little bit of time exploring the things, but more time exploring like what made it high stakes for this person, and how is that actually impacting what they were getting back in terms of feedback and stuff. And so and then the takeaway or the ending was I'm really clear, so clear about what I want to do. So like if I think about across my coaching conversations, those are the ones, they stick with me, but I also just appreciate kind of the nature and the flow of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that dialogue and listening at a, I'm not trying, I don't want to use like the coaching lingo, like level 3 listening, level 2 listening. I just want to like, I think it's describing listening to just beyond the words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not just what they're saying, but what's going on and all around the tone of voice. Maybe there is some sort of feeling or emotion, and that usually can start the questions, or some questions that can lead to really what is really going on, not just what we're hearing, but what's really going on.
Yeah.
So when you have that sort of dialogue with leaders, and do you find or that is usually that question is missing, the question of like, what am I responsible for? Like, what's my role in this?
I think for some people it is, for sure. And I can even look back on my own journey and say I can definitely point to times where it was missing earlier on for me. Probably still missing sometimes, depending on the nature of the conversation. But I do think that there's a lot going on. Leaders are, right now, leading in complexity, leading in high stakes, leading with lots of change and uncertainty. So everything that we've been talking about in terms of leadership. And I think that can be easy to get caught up in being under the pressure for performance and results, and also trying to manage what's happening with employees and where the strategy in the organization is going, and losing sight of, I think this is one of the things that I see sometimes the most is, it's back to that being and doing part, right, that we talk about and in coactive coaching, and we talk a lot about it. But the leaders, because of all that stuff happening in and around them, there can be this over focus on, there are things that I need to do or results that I need to generate. And what we know about leadership is that how leaders show up, how they engage, how they enter a conversation, how they ask questions or don't ask questions, how they listen, all of that, their presence, their ability to be in tough conversations will all impact the nature of what's happening in the organization, the culture of the organization, the results it's getting. But it's much more focused on the presence and the intent and the curiosity or lack of curiosity. And so I think what gets disconnected for leaders is forgetting or losing sight of how the results that they're getting, there is a part that they're playing. That's a more systemic lens that we take in coaching, but there's a part that everybody will be playing, including you as the leader. And I think sometimes it's hard to look at, or what kind of role would that be? And depending on how high the stakes are in the conversation or how frustrated the individual might be, I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of wanting to blame others. So I do think that's a big key.
Yeah, and I know you have been introducing a lot of this dialogue-based approaches to leadership and to organizations, and that's something I really like as well. Like it's like moving from this model of, okay, go do this. And, as a leader, I'm the one who tell people what to do, to let's have that sort of dialogue and find why are we doing this and where we want to go. Yeah. So how do you introduce that shift from, most traditional approaches, like, okay, top down, information is disseminated and everyone follow, and to more of like a dialogue based approach?
How I introduce it, it's first has to come from the leader and the leadership team wanting something to be different, wanting there to be change. So I often will begin to work with a team, a leader or a leadership team, because something's not working. Everything from like, we're doing pretty good, but we know we could get better. We know we could amp it up, to teams that feel like they're in a bit of a breakdown because of interpersonal relationships in the team, or tensions or high stakes between a couple of people. So where the relationship doesn't feel like it's productive or serving the leadership team. And then all the way to teams that are in higher stakes because of they have a what I call a front page crisis, where there's something that really in front of them, and creating upheaval or uncertainty in the organization. So I think the entry point is, for me, is often one of those, like there's some desire for change or something to be different. And then what I will often do is just watch the team in action and begin to look at, so my lens is around behavior and structural behavior in the conversation, and looking at patterns of how people talk and speak with one another, the language and the structure of the conversation that they're having. And with that, then we'll have I will often introduce the concept of monologue and dialogue, and being really intentional about where they might, just pointing out where they might be having more monologue, and is it working for them? And if it is, then great, keep going. And if it's not, how might more conversation, more skillful conversation, or being able to be in a space where they can think together or engage in dialogue, how might that shift the nature of what's happening? Because in that process, even just working towards being more skillful in conversation, all voices are coming in, and there is more collective intelligence that exists. And I think what happens in teams where they don't feel like the answers are there within, and they start looking externally, I think that's often because they've fallen into a pattern where they're not able to be like skillfully in conversation with one another. I can relate that to my own leadership, years ago, even in my own company, where we were struggling with different aspects of the business, definitely in a hill and valley kind of pattern. And I found myself often looking for external consultants. Well, somebody that specializes in this, and I'd hire them to come in. And how about somebody that specializes in this? And I can reflect back on a certain period of time where I wish somebody had pulled us aside as a team and said, let's talk about how you're talking, because there's a lot of knowledge here already. And the more consultants you bring in and the more, external advice you seek, it's not what you're looking for. Like, I wish somebody had had that conversation with us a long time ago. Yeah. So that's kind of the conversation that I believe in. It's not that consultants aren't useful, but I think it's, why are you looking for them? And what are you missing? Often leaders, certainly on leadership teams, will tell you sometimes that they can feel like their voice is minimized or marginalized because they're not the flavor of the day or the expert in something. And so you'll watch senior leadership teams pull in, other expertise. So I think often there's something underneath of that that's getting in the way of them being in full conversation. So I introduce it in different ways, but it's more organic, and it's often coming from them, or a quest or a desire to do something different.
Yeah. It's interesting how it's like a simple observation on how things are happening, or how people are talking, with each other, or having a conversation can tell you so much about the culture.
Yeah.
I often, where I observe, if you want to know what's the culture is about, just notice how people have meetings. It's very telling. It's a lot of, without even saying anything, without, just observe how people are talking, how they're having the meeting. Just as simple as a meeting that has no purpose can tell you that maybe there is a lack of purpose across the board. I think it seems like we're back to where we started around this idea of self-awareness. I
have exactly where you're pointing. It's so funny because I have this quote from Patrick Lencioni. He was interviewed in Forbes magazine. It's been a while back, but it sits on my desk. And so it's right where you're pointing it. He says, if someone were to offer me one single piece of evidence to evaluate the health of an organization, I would not ask for the financial statement, review its product line, or even talk to its employees or customers. I would want to observe the leadership team during a meeting, because this is where values are established, discussed, and lived, and where decisions around strategy, tactics are vetted, made, and reviewed. So there's a lot about what he writes about that I align with, but that was just so funny because it's exactly where you were pointing. So I thought I'd share that. Powerful.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great quote. I love his work as well. It's and then that's probably, something that leaders sometimes miss, that, the answers can be found within. Yeah. It's not outside, just if they pay attention, right? Yeah. So what's one thing that you would, leave, just where would you point us, or the leaders to look? It sounds like it's easy to have, conversations, dialogue. There is a lot of fear around hard and difficult conversations.
Yeah.
So what would be a skill maybe, or something that leaders or team members in general can work on?
I think if I pull from the themes that have come out of our conversation today, it's the thing that stands out for me is what's the part you're playing. A colleague of mine, Sarah Hill, wrote a book called Where Did You Learn to Behave Like That? And, I think those are powerful questions about the role we each will play in the results and the dynamic that's being created. And I think there's so much to be gained from being able to step back and say, so there's some facts about anything. And one, if we take a systemic view of anything that's happening, whether it's a relationship at home or whether it's at work or an organization, like you will be playing a part. And I think to be curious about that and to not take yourself down the shame or blame spiral, but to actually be able to be curious about it and to listen and ask questions around it. So I think some of the best, I think it's hard for leaders to get feedback. And that's a whole nother book, podcast topic about, coaching up and giving feedback to leaders. But I think for anybody, so I sort of subscribe to we're all leaders and leaders at any level, but to hold the question of what's the part that I'm playing, and can you use that to inquire or ask questions from others? What's it like to work with me? Where do I make things easy, or where do I make things difficult, or where might I be unclear, or what's the impact I'm having? Like things that would give you some data. There's a way in which that kind of invites somebody to just bystand and offer, their experience, kind of in an impact feedback way. But
no, that's definitely a topic that we could talk about next. I know. I mean, I could I could go on for a long time here. Just I'm enjoying this conversation. It has a lot of a lot of insights to offer. I appreciate your time and wisdom here.
You're welcome.
It's been great, and I mean, listen, ask questions, be curious, and just notice what's going on. So thank you, Marsha.
Thanks a lot. It was great.